Hi, I'm Mark Regev.
And I'm Ruthie Blum.
And we are here for another episode of Israel Undiplomatic.
Now, if you like our program, please subscribe to JNS TV and jns.org. So, Mark, I've been meaning to ask you since the election in the UK. You served as ambassador for 4 years in Britain. So I'm sure, the internal politics must be of interest to you. And I'm curious what you think about the fact that Labour has won this amazing victory after 14 years of the Conservatives being in power, and what you think that means for relations with Israel.
A good question, Ruthie, and I think the answer is complicated. But the first thing, this is important, because Britain still boxes above its weight. It's not just another country. It's obviously not the United States, but it's not just another country. And if you look at the map in Europe today, so Macron is coming towards the end of his term. And in Germany, the numbers for Chancellor Scholz and his Social Democratic Party are not good at all. And this guy in London, Keir Starmer, just got elected with a massive majority. 2/3 of the members of parliament are his, and he's got a 5-year term. And so this man will be important, I think, globally. And of course, from our perspective, it'll be interesting to see what he comes and what he does about Israel, how he looks at Israel. Because when I was in London, he was not the leader of the Labour Party. He was then in the shadow cabinet. But the leader of the Labour Party at the time was Jeremy Corbyn, and he was renowned. Is there a negative way to say that? He was infamous for being
An anti-Semite.
Well, hostile to Israel at the very, if you want to be nice to him, and a lot of people.
I don't want to be nice to him.
Well, you're not nice. That's the bottom line.
True.
And then the Labour Party was, very hostile to Israel and to Jews, and they might deny the anti-Semitism, but most Jews didn't believe them. Now, Starmer, and I was listening very carefully to his speeches after he won the election, he said for Labour to win the election, Labour had to change. And so that's code for we had to break with the Corbyn legacy. Corbyn brought them an amazing defeat, yes, a huge defeat in 2019. Boris Johnson wiped the floor with Jeremy Corbyn in those elections. The Conservative won seats that they'd never won before. Now we saw the flip side of that. But Corbynism was discredited. I think Starmer understood that he had to move the Labour Party in another direction. Yet, and this is the truth, there is political pressures on him to move in an anti-Israel direction. And there were electoral considerations for Britain. There was a whole bunch of very solid Labour seats, constituencies in Britain. And despite the fact that Labour increased its, support massively in the UK, Labour majorities in some of these Labour bastions went down. And that was because there was often an independent pro-Gaza candidate, they call themselves, especially where there's a large group, a significant group of Muslim voters. There were 4 or 5 seats where these people actually won. They got more votes than Labour. Tellingly, Jeremy Corbyn, who was thrown out of the Labour Party, as former leader, was thrown out of the party by Starmer. He won his seat as an independent, and he also was stressing the Gaza issue. And so I think, though Starmer wants to continue differentiating himself from Corbyn, he will at the same time very much aware of these electoral considerations, which maybe push him in another direction, and we'll have to wait and see what this means.
I doubt it. You know why I doubt it? Because I trust no party called the Labour Party anymore, especially not in Israel, but not only. I mean, the fact is that the left has moved increasingly in the direction of, in the anti-Israel direction, which of course then leads to anti-Semitic direction. The traditional anti-Semites that were on the far right, they're all on the left now, other than fringe. And the worrisome part about it is that the left, first of all, they're never called the extreme left. They're called the center left, or like in Britain now, the anti-Brexit left, or something like that. But, it's all code words. And I've also heard, oh, no, he couldn't be problematic for Israel. He's got a Jewish wife. Well, we've already seen having a Jewish spouse means nothing. On the contrary, sometimes it's worse, as in the case of Kamala Harris and her Jewish husband. But I just want to say one thing. The fact that Starmer said that he will not go against an arrest warrant for Netanyahu in the international court, well, that tells me all I need to know.
So I want to argue with you. I think you're wrong on a couple of issues here. First of all, you were very, dismissive about the Israeli Labour Party, and looking at the reality today, that's probably, a correct political assessment. But you can't deny the fact that this country was formed to a large extent by Labour. Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, Labour. Israel's second Prime Minister, Moshe Sharett, Labour. Israel's third Prime Minister, Levi Eshkol, who led the victory in 1967, Labour. Israel's fourth Prime Minister, Golda Meir, Labour. And the list goes on. This country was established by Labour.
In 1977, Menachem Begin came to power.
Correct.
And all those people said, you stole our country. And from then on, they are subversive. They are behaving like post-Zionists.
I'm sorry, that's not clear. That's not fair. To call the Israeli Labour Party post-Zionist and subversive.
Really?
I think
today it's not called Labour. Today they're calling themselves a mixture of all the left-wing parties. They're calling themselves the Democrats, which is very appropriate.
But I, with your permission, we could have this whole argument about Israeli politics. But I wanted to just mention one thing about Britain where I think you might have missed it. Okay? I say that very politely, of course, and respectfully. But Labour in Britain, look, if you look at Britain traditionally, right? America, though you have criticisms, and we've heard them on this program, America is probably the most pro-Israel country, or one of the most pro-Israel on the planet. And then there's the European Union, which tends to be in a different place. And Britain traditionally oscillates between those two things. Sometimes it's more close to America and more pro-Israel, and sometimes it's more closer to Europe. And it'll be interesting to see what Starmer does, in which direction he moves.
If America, when you say America is the closest to Israel, yes, the American people. The American administration at this point is not. So when you say it's not clear where his alliances will be, I would say he'd be happy to be allied with the Biden administration.
Yes, he'd definitely feel more comfortable with Biden than with Trump. But I want to tell you where the good news.
Yeah.
Maybe good news. Maybe I'm being silly and I'm fooling myself. But the last two Labour Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, were both perceived and considered themselves friends of Israel. Didn't mean they agree with everything that the Sharon government did or governments following that. But they personally always, like President Biden, they would say, I'm a friend of Israel, I'm a Zionist, and so forth. And so maybe there's that tradition in Labour politics. There's also the Corbyn tradition, and we will have to wait and see what Starmer does. If you want a bad sign, a bad omen, Keir is not a common name in Britain. It's an uncommon name. And he's named after a man called Keir Hardie, who's one of the founding members of the British Labour Party at the beginning of the 20th century. And his parents were obviously serious Labour folk, because they named their son after one of the leaders of the party, or the founders of the party. But Keir Hardie wasn't just a founder of the Labour Party. He was also an anti-Semite. At the time of the Boer War, when the Brits were fighting against the Afrikaners in South Africa, he was against the war. And he said, I'm against the war because this is a war for Jewish capitalists, right? And so that's, British Labour can go in either direction. And we'll have to wait and see. The jury is still out.
The jury's out, but if I had to bet with money right now, I know that I would bet that it's way more likely that it'll move to the left and not to the right.
I just want to say something on this issue, right? You said the left has progressively moved to an anti-Israel position. There's one striking exception in Europe, and that is with the German Chancellor, Scholz. I remember when Mrs. Merkel left after so many years in office, people said, basically she was a strong friend of Israel, and whoever comes next can't be as good. And I think a lot of people in government in Israel will tell you today that Scholz has been a very good friend.
Yes, until this whole business of the International Criminal Court. And this also brings us to the whole issue right now of the war in Gaza and the hostage exchange or hostage release. I won't call it exchange because you don't exchange hostages for those animals, but a hostage release deal that is supposedly on the table. And why am I bringing that up? Because all of these so-called friends are pressuring Israel to get a deal done at all costs and end this war, not win this war, end it. And what that means, if we end this war, is that we lose the war. And what that means is that Hamas remains in power. Another thing that these so-called, a bleeding heart friends of Israel have in common is the desire to establish a Palestinian state, which is suicide for Israel, especially now. I think most Israelis realize that. But in any case, that's why I have no faith in those governments until I see otherwise. And, I say...
I want to argue with you, Ruthie, because I think, first of all, amongst, elite Western opinion like the Biden administration, they choose their words very carefully. They talk about, and I'm quoting directly from how they say it, they talk about a pathway to a Palestinian state. Now, you can say it's all the same, right? But it's not all the same, because what they're basically saying is, we know it's not on the table now, we know it's not going to happen anytime soon, but let's keep options open for the future. That's what they're saying. And so the idea that the Americans or the Germans or the British think there's a Palestinian state tomorrow, I mean, even the Spaniards and the Irish and the Norwegians who did this disgusting, useless, detrimental thing and recognizing it as state, they actually didn't change anything. Nothing changes except they're enhancing Palestinian intransigence, right?
Right, but you see, it doesn't matter. That part doesn't matter because Palestinian statehood, as many times as we have offered it to them and as many times we've withdrawn from territory and everything we do, they don't want a state. They want to supposedly strive for a state while annihilating ours. They don't want a state.
No, I agree.
So the whole
or they want a state as a platform to continue the struggle by other means, right?
Right, but of course they could have had a state 100 times over, and so we know that already. And whether the fantasists know it, we don't know. But what we know is that rhetoric is important. Words matter, okay? Words matter. And all of this business about, you keep talking about it and we talk about it. And now, Saudi Arabia, that we were on a path. Speaking of paths, that actually was a path for normalization with Saudi Arabia. And now the Saudis just keep a Palestinian state, Palestinian state, Palestinian state. This is while we still haven't eliminated the more, I won't even say more radical elements of Palestinian society, because I'm sorry, they're all radical. Not every Palestinian is, but all the groups ruling all the territory, they are all terrorist groups and funded by Iran. But we have to talk about that.
Can I on this situation?
Yes, okay.
Even the Israeli left, who you do not like, has moved away from this sort of Palestinian statehood. They don't want to talk about it.
No, they don't.
And in fact, an Arab member of the Knesset, Ahmed Tibi, said earlier this week, right? And he's no Zionist, yes? I think he's a proud Palestinian nationalist. He said, shame on you, Israeli opposition. Yeah? Shame on you, Israeli left. You've abandoned Palestinian statehood. And I would say to Ahmed Tibi, look in the mirror and ask that you don't have the Israeli right, fine. If you've lost the Israeli left, you must be doing something very, very, very wrong. And I think there should be some serious soul-searching amongst so-called moderate Palestinians who say they want in peace. Why have they've not just annoyed the Israeli right, why have they totally alienated the Israeli left? And I have a simple answer for you. It's their refusal to disassociate themselves with or condemn in any way October 7th.
Well, absolutely. It's not just that they refuse to condemn it, Mark. They're paying the terrorists who committed the rapes and the beheadings. They're paying them stipends. They're paying their families. And even if they had, let's suppose they had condemned it. We condemn it. It doesn't mean anything if they're funding it and supporting it. And their Facebook pages, their school books, they glorify all of the Nukhba terrorists from October 7th. So, and when you say, well, they must be the Arab extremist Knesset members must be doing something wrong if they lost the Israeli left. No, they're not doing something wrong. They hate Israel. They have citizenship. My tax shekels pays the salary of people like Ahmed Tibi.
Can I tell you? I first of all, that's a perspective that you're expressing. But I want to tell you,
Yes.
remember there was a man who's still in the Knesset, but he used to be considered part of the right, a man called Avigdor Lieberman. And he had this plan that he said in the framework of a former, what's it called, an agreement with the Palestinians, we would keep the settlements, and they would be annexed to Israel, and large Arab communities, the Lieberman plan, like Al-Fahim next to the border, could become part of the Palestinian zone, Palestinian state even. And what did these so-called representatives of the Israeli Arab community, these Palestinian nationalists in the Knesset, what did they say? They would say, never. That's
course.
racism. Where you can't take away our Israeli citizenship.
Of course.
Now, so I think their attitude towards Israel and the Jewish state is far more complicated. On Jerusalem Day, we discussed in this program that East Jerusalem Palestinians, who are not Israeli citizens, right? They're residents of the Jewish state, but they're not citizens. When asked, do they want to be part of Israel or part of...
They said Israel.
They say Israel because ultimately they're not stupid. They understand that this is with all our problems, this is a successful first world democratic country. And if anyone says to you, do you want to live in a first world country or part of, you're not allowed to say third world anymore. Did you know that? You're supposed to say global south. But if you want to be part of the global south, who volunteers to want to be part of the global south if you can live in a first world country?
And by the way, I refuse to use politically correct language. Refuse. Every day the words change, and I've lost track.
So we'll say third world. Third world.
Whatever we'll say. Okay, third world, right.
Can I go back to the point you raised about the deal? Okay.
Yes, we need to talk about that deal because right now it's being spoken of as though we're on the verge of a deal with Hamas, brokered by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, and that we've also sent representatives to negotiate, and that the reason it's now happening supposedly is that Hamas gave in on one of its key demands. So we have to break that down a bit because it's also a big lie. They did forfeit one of their demands, but the joke is the only demand they forfeited was that they won't demand a complete end to the war, ceasefire, withdrawal of all Israeli troops before they sit down to discuss any hostage. So that part they've given up.
Can I say, though,
Yes.
if there has been any moderation in Hamas's negotiating position, let's be frank,
It's because we're blitzing them.
It's because we're in Rafah and we've been taking out, I think, as we said last week in the program, hundreds of Hamas terrorists have been killed in this operation. We're getting closer to them every day. And the fact that they are desperate for a breather, that is expediting, we hope, the chances of a deal that brings the hostages home.
Yes, but here's the trouble. The left, and not only the far left in Israel, all those centrists and everything, I hear it all day long. They pound on you. And this is what they're saying. They're saying, no, this shows that we should stop now. We should now get the hostages out and we'll stop. No, it shows we shouldn't stop. It's military pressure. And the other thing is, there is a whole group, I wouldn't say half, I think it's far less than half of Israelis who believe that we're not really accomplishing anything in Gaza, that we're not going to win the war, that there's no such thing as victory, that certainly a total victory, but not any real victory, and that the best we can hope for now is to make a deal with Hamas, get hostages, which, by the way, Hamas is not offering all of the hostages. Let's make that clear, because if Hamas were offering all the hostages, it would lose any leverage it has. So that's one thing. And the other thing they're saying is, and then Hezbollah has agreed that if we stop fighting Hamas, Hezbollah will stop blitzing us with missiles and drones. Excuse me, this is insanity.
So I'll tell you how I see the situation. First of all, if it's possible to get a deal that brings a lot of our Israelis home, I think we should try to do it. Right? We did it in November. We can do it again now. If we can save the lives of people who are being held hostage in Gaza, I'm willing to pay a price. And we should do so. I think, though, we have to understand that Hamas isn't going to release all the hostages and that we'll have to go back to fighting. And I think that was in Netanyahu's principles,
I'm
right?
going to tell you something right now. Okay. So first of all, because, we don't know exactly the details of this deal that everyone's arguing over as though we've all read it.
Yeah.
But from what I have gleaned from all media reports, we have this 3 stages. First stage, women, the sick, and the elderly will be released. These include 33 living and dead hostages over a 6-week period. That means during that 6-week period, there's no firing. Second phase, the rest of the living hostages, mainly the young men and soldiers. And this phase is already disputed with Hamas because they want that to be an extended ceasefire to allow for more negotiations. And then there's a third stage, the rest of the dead bodies are supposed to be
So
released.
I personally, and I'm not in the negotiating room, and I'm not a decision maker, but
Yes.
I have a problem with talking about bringing back dead people when there are live people left
I
in Gaza.
agree.
I think we should be prioritizing live Israelis. For live Israelis, I'm willing to pay a price that I'm sorry. I
Right.
apologize to the families of the people
I
killed.
happen to agree with that, by the way,
Yes.
because, of course, if you're saving
A live
someone who's
person,
alive. And I know that Netanyahu agrees with that too. But here's the thing. So Netanyahu says, okay, I have 5 red lines I will not cross in these negotiations.
Yeah.
Everything else is negotiable.
Right.
Okay, so the five are, any deal will allow Israel to resume fighting until all the objectives of the war have been achieved.
which includes the release of all hostages. Correct.
Exactly. And
Right.
destruction of Hamas's military capabilities and governing.
Yeah.
And no smuggling of weapons to Hamas from Egypt. Through
And
Egypt.
that's very important because we've taken over the Philadelphia corridor, Rafah, and the fear is that if you give up what you've taken, then they can rearm, regroup,
Which
and then
they will.
So
Which they will.
understand.
Then there's no return of the thousands of terrorists to northern Gaza.
Okay.
And then 4 is maximizing the number of living hostages released, as you
Okay,
said.
yeah.
And the 5th is that this deal will allow Israel to return the hostages without forfeiting the aims of the war, which is without having to stop fighting Hamas. Now, Hamas doesn't really agree to any of this, and there is one clause that it really doesn't agree to, and that it says, okay, Biden said, we'll try our best to do this, and they want they want written guarantees that we will stop the war if they do this and this and this. Now, this is a sticking point it's not a small one. Second of all, I heard this morning that already they're saying, oh, wait, the Philadelphia corridor? No, Israel can't have control of the Philadelphia corridor. So I will believe that a deal like this is made. I'll believe it when I see it. And it's really tragic for these poor families who every time there's hope for a deal, it drives them crazy. If I were in their shoes, I would be a wreck. But it's also causing a lot of the left to pressure those families by saying to them, you realize that Netanyahu, he doesn't really care about he doesn't care about the hostages. He doesn't care if they all die. He just wants to keep his coalition intact. And you think Netanyahu had all the hostages in his basement. And they're whispering in their ears, and some of them don't buy it. And some of them, because they're so distraught, do buy it, and they think it's the government's fault. And so what they're saying is, okay, so let's just end the war.
I'd remind you that Biden and the administration have said consistently that Israel has, the whole proposal were on the table. Biden described it as a Netanyahu proposal. And so that Israel hasn't been willing to go the extra mile. Look, we agreed to terms in November. We'd agreed to terms. Now, the question is, and we don't have an answer, is does Sinwar really want a deal? Or does he want a deal? Now, I have to tell you, and because you know me, I can be a bit of a cynic and realpolitik and all that, right? Because I'm convinced Hamas is Hamas, they'll give us an excuse to go back to fight, even if the wording of an agreement is written in a different way. Because either they won't release all the hostages, right?
As the last time?
Or there'll be a missile fired, or there'll be shots fired, right? They will give us an excuse. I'd remind you in 1973, right? The UN imposed a ceasefire upon us in the south, and there was some local fighting which gave Israel a pretext to continue. In other words, I believe this can be navigated. And it's important that, we should try to get a deal. That Netanyahu has an obligation to negotiate tough to get a maximum, as it said, get a maximum of people alive out. And at the same time, we have to have no illusions about who we're negotiating with.
Right. So, but here's the thing, and that's all well and good. And if Netanyahu says, okay, too bad, one rocket or a hostage that was supposed to be returned isn't returned, etc., we're going back in. We're gonna take action from the air and the ground and underground. And then the UN Security Council says that we're violating the terms of
No,
this
but if there's
deal.
a provocation, once again, I can't believe... It's like, the famous story about the scorpion and the frog and crossing the river, and the scorpion is... I can't believe that Hamas will not give us a pretext, if we need one, to go back and finish the job.
It will, but by this point, the international community, I hate that word, whatever that means, our enemies abroad have ceased giving us legitimacy for this war since around October 8th. And so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what they do. It really doesn't. We can see that it hasn't mattered because now they've switched the entire focus of what happened on October 7th to lies about what we're doing to Palestinians in Gaza. And that has taken over the whole narrative. Then, of course, we're also blamed by pro-Israel people. We're blamed for not having good enough propaganda to explain or to tell our story. The point is that I'd like to know, what do we do? Okay, well, let's say we arrange this deal. They said 30, whatever number it is, of women and children. And suddenly on that day, 19 are released, not 30. And Hamas says, oh, sorry.
We couldn't find them.
We couldn't find them because they're also with Islamic Jihad and they're also with civilians, which, by the way,
true.
Innocent civilians. And they'll say, we don't know where they are. It's not our fault. Then what do you think? You think then we'll still have legitimacy? That's the trouble. And a lot of the parents of the males who are hostage in Gaza have said, if you make this deal in its current form, our sons will be stuck there.
Correct.
God knows.
But don't forget, that also gives us, though, first of all, I want to see them all out, yeah?
Yeah.
But if they don't release, let's say, especially the soldiers who were kidnapped on October 7th, if they don't release them, once again, we have a pretext to go back in and finish the job because, like in November last year, from Israel's thinking, right, we have a temporary pause in the fighting in order to get hostages out.
Oh,
but
and by the way, not just to get hostages out, to get humanitarian aid in.
But that's happening anyway. Yeah, that's happening anyway. But if they want to say that, they can say that. What is also interesting, I think, Ruthie, is that this has an internal Israeli political ramification because within the coalition, so I think Netanyahu and the two ultra-Orthodox parties, Likud and the two Shas and Yahadut Torah, they've come out in favor in principle of a deal. They want a good deal, but they've come out in favor of principle, while Netanyahu's two right partners, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they have said that they've threatened to bring the government down on a deal that they can't live with. And they've come out against a deal. And the question is, do you think this is a real threat to the coalition?
At the moment, I don't believe them in the sense that if they do that, they have no other political home. I mean, this is the best they're both ministers in this government. After that, if they topple the government and we'll have, usher in a new left-wing government or something, they're toast. So it isn't really in their interest, but that's a political question. I want to talk about an ideological question. If we sign a bad deal, which I don't believe Netanyahu will do, I don't. I trust him not to. But let's say he does, just theoretically, and it's a deal
You
that
probably
ends
thought
the war.
Gilad Shalit was a bad deal.
I thought it was a terrible deal.
Okay.
And if, let's say he does, and I feel that this has now endangered us, all the soldiers that were killed in this war were for naught, and that Hezbollah watched us lose a war and we're sitting ducks, and all the rest of our kids are now in danger of another October 7th, then I would ideologically be siding with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. these are two different questions. Toppling the government is one,
Yes.
and whether you have a belief in a certain policy, and those two aren't always the same thing.
I understand.
You know.
I understand, but I would say the following. There's a question is, what is Itamar Ben-Gvir all about? Is he just a right-wing rabble-rouser or is he a serious politician? And
He's both.
Well, I want to tell you, there was a report I heard this morning on the Israeli radio by the political correspondent was saying that if you speak to people from the Likud today or people from the other coalition partners, except for Ben-Gvir's party, they think that he's a pyromaniac, that he sees his numbers going up in the polls, and that he doesn't want to talk about his failures in his own ministerial post, whether it's in the prison service. We spoke about that last week, that there's not enough places for all the prisoners.
Oh, and by the way,
yes. And for all these reasons, he has an interest in early elections, and that means bringing the government down. And the truth is he's got the numbers to do so. Now,
except it is and it's not in his interest, because it might gain him seats with the people who love him, you know, his loyal base, the ones who don't say, oh, don't topple the government. His loyal ones, maybe he'd get a few more seats, but that wouldn't put him in a position. It won't get him the premiership.
But I think the jury is still out on him. Is he a serious politician or is he just a rabble-rouser?
Listen, I don't know. Politicians don't interest me that much. Policy interests me and ideology interests me. And politicians are, I don't have that high an opinion of politics in that sense. But I will say, if you're going to talk about pyromaniacs, how come we can't talk about Benny Gantz, key pyromaniac, Mr. looking at the polls and saying, better ditch this war cabinet and Eisenkot. Let's ditch the war cabinet.
I'll tell you why that's different.
Because he couldn't topple the government.
I think he made a mistake. Yeah, he made a mistake. He shouldn't have left.
Government.
Exactly.
But he undermined the war effort. These ex-generals, when they come out and they say on TV and they go to Washington and they say it there, oh, we can't really win this war. And anyway, Bibi only cares about his seat. They do incredible damage. At least Ben-Gvir and Smotrich say, if you make a bad deal with the evil enemy, then we can't support it. Don't you see a difference between those two things?
I'm sorry, but I think to presume that someone like Ben-Gvir is not making very, very political calculations on what's good for him and his party, right? Now, all politicians do. But once again, we will see in the next few weeks are they pyromaniacs? Are they right-wing anarchists? Or are they, in fact, serious?
No, the question is, are they suicidal politically? Because let's suppose all he cares about is, I'm willing to accept that. I mean, as I said, politicians and policy don't always go together, and certainly not ideology, although Itamar Ben-Gvir has been an ideologue his whole life, so there I will give him the benefit of the doubt. The point, though, is politically, if he topples the government, and even if he gets a few more seats in the Knesset next time, his career is in the toilet.
Depends what he wants to be. If he wants to be
a minister,
if he wants to be in the government, if he wants to influence, or does he just want to be? No, but I remember at the time, to make a comparison from the left, that people talked about Shlomit Aloni, right? She was the leader of Meretz, the leader of the left, and she was this very, very vocal politician. And then when Barak actually brought her into his Labour government, right, at the time of the Camp David talks with Arafat and so forth, she wasn't happy as a minister because she had to have responsibility and run something, and it was not a natural fit for her. And I'm thinking that Itamar Ben-Gvir, obviously there's a huge difference between the two people. She was a feminist. She broke glass ceilings for women and all sorts of things.
Don't get me started on Shulamit Aloni,
but all I'm saying is, some people aren't made for government. They're made for opposition. And maybe Itamar Ben-Gvir is one of those people.
Actually, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
That being a hothead and all that is actually good in opposition and not so good in the coalition.
But I think we're going to have to finish this conversation. We can never finish it, but we have to finish it for now and continue it again next week. Ruthie, it was a pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure as always, Mark.